Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the USO MVP. That is Military Virtual Programming. My name is Chris Jacobs, and I am honored to be your host. And today, if you are a fan of comedy, you are in the right place because we're going to be talking to a very accomplished individual. I'm going to take a big breath before I read you his resume because, yes, it is that involved. He is the producer of The Office, the American version. He is the co-creator of Parks and Recreation, the creator of The Good Place, the co-creator of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, producer of Master of None, and the co-creator of Rutherford Falls. He also wrote for 2 seasons on SNL. Please welcome the very talented Mike Schur. Mike, how you doing?
Hello, I'm doing great. How are you?
How are you, man? It took me a little while to get through that resume there, dude. Very accomplished. Very, very cool.
That's very flattering.
You know, I got to say that, creating one successful TV show is possibly a career for some people. But, I just listed 6 plus your work on SNL. I mean, congratulations on your success.
Thank you. I always feel like it's important to say that these things aren't done alone usually. That, like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, for example, I created with my friend Dan, and Parks and Recreation was Greg Daniels, who adapted The Office, sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, come on, kid, you're getting called up to the big leagues. And a lot of this stuff is collaborative. So I'm always, I know that people know that, but I also always think it's important to say it.
Yeah, and of course, your latest creation, Rutherford Falls, co-created with the star of the show, Ed Helms.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Ed and I worked together in The Office, and I'm from suburban Connecticut, and his character, Andy Bernard, was from suburban Connecticut. And I always felt like I had a special kinship with what it's like to grow up in a boring place like suburban Connecticut. And so, yeah, it was years later, we had this idea, and we knew this writer named Sierra Teller Ornelas, who's Navajo, and asked her to come in, and the 3 of us did it together. The first season just came out on Peacock, and now we're working on season 2.
Congrats on that as well. And I know in doing my research about you, I saw that you guys have a very large number of indigenous people on your writing staff, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, that was really neat. Half of the writing staff are native people from a bunch of different tribes and nations, and that was really cool. It was really informative, frankly. Like I knew very, very little about the lives of Native Americans. There's more than 500 federally recognized tribes in this country, and most people, including me before this started, could only name 4 maybe. And so it was a really fun thing to just talk to people whose experiences are very different from my own, and get to know them. And they're super funny. And because Rutherford Falls was the first native show, really the first show run by a native person on TV, so like they've got a whole lot of stories to tell. Like we've been TV has been going on for 100 years, and native people have not gotten to tell any stories at all, and so now it's tumbling out of them, which is really fun to watch.
Television producer Mike Schur joining us, and I'd like to invite anybody who is watching to use your chat box to drop any shout outs or let us know where you're joining us from. I'll try to mention as many of those as I can. Mike, it seems like you were destined to be an entertainment writer. I know that you were once the editor of the Harvard Lampoon, which has amazing pedigree going all the way back to the 1800s.
Yeah, the Lampoon is a humor magazine at Harvard that started in 1876, I'm pretty sure. And, Conan O'Brien was the president, and some great writers, a lot of Simpsons writers and a lot of comedy writers in general. And then also more serious, sort of high-minded folks like, John Updike and George Plimpton and all these sort of famous authors and writers from the early part of the century. And it was a huge reason I wanted to go to Harvard, actually, was because I knew about the Lampoon and it seemed like the coolest place. And I joined when I got there as a freshman. And it was sort of defining for me that was basically my college experience, was being on the Lampoon around a bunch of really funny, really smart people, a lot of whom have gone on to be writers and directors and actors. And BJ Novak from The Office was on the Lampoon, and there's a bunch of, it has a long and proud pedigree. So it's weird. It's not exactly like studying biochemistry or something. Like when you talk about like what's the point of going to college, and what's the point of going to Harvard? You don't think about like learning how to be a comedy writer. But for me and for a lot of other people, that's really that's the draw of that place, is it has this kind of weird 140-year-old factory that churns out comedy writers, which is a pretty cool thing,
Yeah, for people who know what it is and who want to get into that line, that's kind of like the holy grail. And of course, spun out into the National Lampoon by the wildly talented Doug Kenny, creator of Caddyshack, one of my favorite movies of all time. And if you're a golfer, I think it's requisite viewing for at least every 6 months or so. Like, I want to go to our first live location right now. For this, we're going to go to Camp Schwab in Japan. So, Camp Schwab, you ready for us? There you are. How you doing? Welcome.
Oh, hi. Welcome. And nice to meet you, Mike. Welcome to Camp Schwab. We are here at the USO. I'm Maria, the center manager here. We have a few members that would like to ask you some questions today. First, I will call Corporal Chris Payne.
Hi, how are you today, sir?
I'm good, man. How are you?
Doing all right. Okay, so for my question, I understand that working as a television producer has its difficulties, has its challenges. Can you tell us how you've been able to continue production during the pandemic?
Yeah, good question. I mean, when it first happened, we were in the middle of like a production meeting to start work on this show. We were days away from like the rubber meeting the road. Everything shut down, everybody scrambled. And the real answer to your question is there's a person on every show called a line producer who is really responsible for kind of making the gears of shows and movies work. Like they're the ones who hire staff and kind of like organize everything and set schedules and deal with problems. The line producer that I work with is a guy named Morgan Sackett, and he's best in the business. And he was just like, all right, we got to adapt to this. We got to figure out what the rules are. And we set a bunch of protocols with working with the studio Universal that makes the show. It was like, all right, everybody is going to wear masks and face shields. We're going to stand 6 feet away. There has to be 144 square feet of space within every studio per person. So we're going to have a guy with a counter as people go in and out, like a umpire calling balls and strikes to count how many people are inside. We kind of made it up as we went along based on what the protocols were for LA and for California and for the country. So it was really hard. Like it feels silly to say that because what we were doing in terms of its difficulty paled in comparison to what EMTs and nurses and doctors and a whole bunch of other people, even, Amazon warehouse employees were going through. But it's a logistical nightmare when things are going really well. And so it's really just the result of a lot of people sitting down and scratching our heads and thinking like, well, we know what we have to do. What are the obstacles? How do we overcome them? And then the gears kind of just grinding for a while until we figured out a way to make it all work. The scariest thing, honestly, was the actors can't wear masks, right? Like they can't wear face shields. They can't. So the space around the actors became really, really intensely guarded. Like everyone who, and this is, pre-vaccine, obviously, but anyone who was in a space anywhere near an unmasked actor had to just be super, super cautious and make sure that they weren't, that they weren't potentially putting those actors at risk. So it was, I think we went through our own version of what everybody went through in every business, which was just like the playbook gets thrown out, you start writing a new one, and everybody kind of has to abide by it in order for it to work. And even then, we had positive cases pop up. Every show that we didn't start till September of 2020, but every show had positive cases. Every show had, different zones and tried to wall off people into different areas. And we did the best we could. That's sort of the end. We figured that's sort of all we can do is we'll do the best we can to keep everybody safe,
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate the answer. It answers all my questions.
Sure.
Thank you.
You got it.
Good question. Who's next there in Japan?
All right. Our next question will be from Miss Diane Manusa, military spouse here.
Morning. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Can you answer the question? If I couldn't produce television shows, I would.
Oh man. I would be sadder. I would be less happy as a person. I wanted to be a teacher when I was a kid. My grandmother was a math teacher in Houston, and there's a lot of teachers in my extended family. And I sort of thought, for lack of anything else that I was really passionate about, that I was going into teaching. And I didn't really know what that meant, whether that was high school level teaching or trying to be a college professor or, I don't know, teaching web design. I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but that was what was in my head. And when I graduated from college, I'm a very practical person. I'm not super into taking risks, honestly. And I decided to give myself 1 year to try to get a job as a TV writer. And I figured if I didn't get a job in a year, that I would go back to school and become a teacher. So I graduated and I got hired at Saturday Night Live about 8 months after I graduated or something. So I slipped in under the deadline, and then I managed to keep the job and kind of keep going. But I think that's probably the only real answer, that I would have been a teacher of some kind, and I don't know what kind. Probably a high school teacher would be my wild guess.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
One more. This question will be asked by Lance Corporal Caleb Coleman. Come on up, Caleb.
Welcome, Caleb.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good, and you, sir?
Good.
So my question is, can you share any news about any of the shows you're currently working on and what we can look forward to seeing, sir?
Sure. I produced a show called Hacks that was on HBO Max here in the States, that starred Gene Smart, and that show got picked up for season 2, so that's being written right now. That'll come out soon, or not soon, really, next April. I have a lot of people I've been working with for a long time on various shows that I've worked on, like The Office and Parks and Recreation and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, who are all now have ascended and are now like at the level where they're creating their own shows. And I'm sort of trying to like help them. So, for example, my friend Matt has been working on this show for a while now. He just finished the pilot episode, the first script, and it's really funny. It's about this guy who is sort of a slob, and he's looking for a roommate. And his roommate, this guy, answers an ad, and he comes to his house, and he's like the coolest dude ever. He's a little older, like the main character is like 30, and this guy is like in his 60s, but he's a super cool guy and like has the chillest attitude about everything. And then the twist is that he realizes that his roommate is actually him from the future, who's come back. He invented a time machine, and he's come back to like stop this guy from doing a bunch of crazy stuff. And so it's like living with a older version of yourself who knows all of the mistakes that you're going to make and all of the problems that you're going to have in your life. So that's in the really early stages. And the way these things work is like, he just finished writing that script, and I think it's really funny, but between now and the time that you would ever see that on TV, it's 2 years, because it's like, there's so many obstacles that you have to overcome. You know, so many people have to approve it, and so many things have to go right. So there's a bunch of stuff like that where people have written scripts that I think are really good that we've been working on and developing, but it's just the lead time on these things is endless. And so there's certain things I know are going to come out, like Rutherford Falls season 2 will be out next year, and Hack season 2 will be out next year. And so there's things that that are real that I know will come out. And then there's 15 things that have that range from like, who knows, all the way to, you know, they'll definitely exist someday. So I wish I could tell you more, but the nature of this business is that you don't know that anything is actually going to air until like this second it airs, because you have to jump over a million hurdles to finish any project.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, gentlemen.
My pleasure.
Appreciate you guys there at Camp Schwab in Japan. Thank you for joining us here on the USO MVP series. And Mike, it's that old adage of, the overnight success only took 3 years, you know?
That's right. Yes, it really is. It's like anytime you see any TV show or any movie, I mean, people began working on that between 2 and 15 years ago. Yeah. And it's the culmination of a lot of hard work from a lot of different people.
Got a little shout out for you from the chat box here. This comes from David Ramon, who says, "Thank you, Michael Schur, for bringing so much joy to the world with numerous shows that you helped create and produce." Hello from Ohio there. And Mike, I just had a quick follow-up question for you that was part of your answer to one of the servicemen in Japan. You're talking about being delayed by the pandemic. Did you consider writing the pandemic into any of the scripts?
That was a huge question, obviously, for everybody who was working on any project. Was on the other side of this, do you work that in? That's everyone's reality, right? So part of us was like, it would be crazy not to. But then at the end of the day, I think every show and every showrunner went through his or her project and thought, like, is this an element that does anything, that adds anything to the fabric of the show, right? Because there were some shows are just pure escapism, and it's about just being entertained and being transported to another time and place. Some shows are really realistic, gritty looks at what's happening in the country or in the world right now at this moment. So everyone sort of made his or her own decision about that. In the end, in both of the shows I was working on that were shooting, we decided not to. We decided not to address it, and it's a slightly alternate universe where the pandemic never happened. And that was done after a lot of discussion and a lot of thinking, a lot of mulling over. And in both of the cases, we just sort of felt like, I mean, in the case of Rutherford Falls, for example, that show is very specifically about Native American issues, what it's like to be Native in the country right now. And we sort of felt like adding in this extra element of the pandemic just sort of sideswiped it a little bbit, and it would have become something else. It would have become, the message would have been muddled a little bit. And the same was true for the show Hacks. It just felt like it wasn't going to add anything, and all it would do was subtract. So there were some shows I know that ran right at it, and the characters would wear masks in scenes, and they would, if you're doing a show of like a hospital drama or a legal drama or something, like, it's that what the pandemic did to those industries or those locations was really interesting and provided a lot of drama and intensity and scariness. And so I think that some showrunners felt like this will be better for our show. Comedy, not so much. I think mostly what you think of when people want to watch comedy shows is like, I just want to laugh for 30 minutes and then go to sleep. And so we ended up not doing that. But yeah, it was discussed. I think everyone thought about it.
Yeah, and there's an argument too that it would take away from the escapism that people are trying to accomplish. Especially with comedies, like you say, they just want to laugh for half an hour and then go to sleep. They don't want to be reminded. We're constantly reminded of it anyway.
Yeah, like that's what we felt. We felt like people were living this kind of rough reality, and that the TV could provide a way to get away from it, and that by having everybody in masks and face shields and everything else on the show, it maybe dampened their enthusiasm.
Mike, got another one for you from the chat box. This comes from Anna Barga, who is in Fort Hood, Texas. She says that she is a military spouse who works in government. She says, I love how Parks and Rec makes fun of both the government and the residents. How did you make the show such an accurate exaggeration of reality? She also wants to say thank you for all of your great work on The Office and Parks and Rec.
Thank you. Also, reverse shout out to Fort Hood. I spent a lot of time in Texas. My family lived down there in Houston for a long time. That was a process of like going to a lot of city council meetings in a lot of different places in California and just observing and talking to people who work in local government. And we really wanted to show on that show in particular, like, government isn't one thing. Like, there's a lot of different kinds of people who have a lot of different attitudes about government and how it should function. And so, we had characters on that show who were libertarians. We had characters who were super politically progressive. We had everything in between. And then we also noted that, one of the fundamentally great things about this country is that when governments meet, especially at the local level, anyone who wants to can show up and express his or her opinion. And they sure do. And it's really, sometimes it's people who have really intense feelings about very serious issues, and sometimes it isn't that. And so we tried to show that in that show, like, this is just a thing that happens, and it happens all over the country. In every town in the country, there is a open forum where if you want to express your opinion, you get to go and do that. And it was really honestly a celebration of that, because that is one of my favorite things about this country. And it's, I think, what separates us from a lot of other countries is anyone can shout about their government for as long as they want for any reason, and the government has to listen. And so that was the idea behind those meetings, was like, this is really what happens. So let's just show what really happens,
Yeah, if anybody out there is just scrolling through their cable channels one night and happens to come across a city council meeting that's being aired live, just hold on it for 5 minutes because you may see some of the greatest comedy ever.
It is good, solid fun. Very frequently, yeah, it's good entertainment.
Oh, man. All right, Mike, we're going to go to our second live location now. And for this, we return to Japan, where we're going to U.S. Fleet Activity, Sasebo, Japan. Hi, guys. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good morning from Japan. My name is Dali. I'm the center manager here at Sasebo. Here we are the longest running open center in Japan. We were established in 1993. And actually our base is really pretty old. This building was built in 1924. Wow. So a lot of historical stuff happening over here. So I've been working with the USO for a long time, since 2013. And I started off as a volunteer, and I have some of the volunteers that are here as well with me and the service members. I love the USO. Thank you so very much for taking your time and being here for us. Like I said, I started volunteering. The USO, got my heart. I love giving back to the community by, being able to have programming in the center. So again, thank you so very much for you and taking your time and being here with our service members and our families. And we have your youngest fan also here.
Yeah. Has a lot to say.
yes. So we also have some questions for you. So we're going to start off.
Great.
Sir, USO volunteer at Duty. I just want to know, how did you get started, sir?
Well, when I was a kid, I stayed home sick from school one day. I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and my mom rented me a bunch of comedy movies, and I just watched them for a whole day. All I did was watch comedy movies, and some kind of light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, man, I don't know what this is, but I want to do this. And then I just got really interested in comedy. I started reading comedy books, and I would go to the CVS in my town and buy Mad magazines and like study them. And it just became a thing. I fell in love with David Letterman and later with Conan O'Brien. And I just found comedy so fascinating and fun, and I just loved it. And I wrote all the time, and I did skits with my friends. And then in college, we were saying earlier, I joined this thing called the Harvard Lampoon, which was a comedy magazine where a lot of the graduates have gone on to write in TV. And after I graduated, I just was like, I'm going to try to make this work. So I got started. My first job was working at Saturday Night Live right after I graduated. I got hired there in 1998. And I was very bad for a while. It should be noted. I was very, very bad at that job. I did not understand how to do it. I was wholly unqualified. But I kind of like hung on and figured it out. And then I worked there for 6.5 years, and then I moved to LA and started writing on The Office. So it was really, there isn't like a sort of any kind of really magical story about it. It was just the thing that I loved and was passionate about when I was a kid. And then I just kind of like decided to try to make it work. And I got very lucky, and I got a couple breaks at the right times. And now here I am 25 years later or whatever it is.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate that question. You guys, is there another one for Mike?
Yes. Hi, gozaimasu. My question is, are any of your the characters based on people you know in real life?
Yeah, they definitely are. Although I shouldn't say who they really are because they might sue me. Part of the fun thing about being a writer, especially in TV and especially when you work on a TV show that lasts for a long time, is you really get to create characters and like mold them and grow them over many, many years and stuff. And another fun thing is that occasionally you'll meet someone in real life and think like, oh, this is a kind of person I've never met before. I'm going to like grab this idea of this person and put it into a character. And I would say if you could give TV writers truth serum, I think they would tell you that fully half of the characters they've ever created in their lives are in some way based on a real person, like a person they know or a family member. One of the funny things about like, for example, Parks and Recreation, a show I co-created a long time ago. I grew up in a town called West Hartford, Connecticut, which is a pretty boring suburb in central Connecticut. And there was a town nearby called Simsbury, and Simsbury was way nicer than our town. Like everyone was super rich, and everybody's house was enormous, and they had these beautiful rolling lawns. And people from Simsbury were like super snobby and like really like looked down on people from West Hartford, even though West Hartford's a perfectly lovely town, you know, like it's fine. But when I created Parks and Recreation, it took place in a town called Pawnee, Indiana, which I made up. But then I invented a whole town next door called Eagleton that was exactly like Simsbury, where everyone was super rich and super snobby and hated all the people from Pawnee. And so all of like, it wasn't even just that like there was a character who was based on something in real life. There was a whole town in that show that was based on a real thing from my life. So that's the fun of being a writer is, you know, sometimes you're working purely from your imagination, but other times it's like whatever your life experience is, you get to put that into a show. You get to like bring that kind of stuff to life. And it's really fun when it works out that way. So yes, that's the long-winded answer. The much shorter answer is yes, definitely a lot of characters on the shows are people I know in real life.
Taking advantage of that creative license. I know we have one more question there for Mike.
Hi. What series did you have the most fun creating and why?
Oh boy. They're all really fun. I know that's a boring answer. I apologize for being boring, but they're all really, really fun. I mean, I would say that they're fun for different reasons. Like Parks and Recreation was the first thing I ever created. And for that, it has a very, very special place in my heart. Like I'm so proud of that show, and I'm so proud of the fact that we made it work. But also like Brooklyn Nine-Nine is a show I created with a very, very good friend of mine who I've known for 25 years. And the process of doing that with him was really special in a completely different way. And then The Good Place, which was the last show I created, was the first thing that I ever done that was purely on my own. And it was a very weird show. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a very weird show. It takes place entirely in the afterlife, and everybody's dead and they're struggling to kind of exist in this kind of bizarre heaven type place. And that was a purely original idea that just came out of only my head. It wasn't done collaboratively. So I love them all for different reasons. I think if I had to answer, I think I would say Parks and Recreation, just because it was the first thing I ever did. And so it's sort of like the original experience of going through that process. But I really have a lot of fondness for all of them. Did your baby have a question, by the way? I'm happy to answer one more.
Hi, do you have a question? Yeah. No, he's okay. Continue making shows.
Tough crowd.
Next time. We'll get back to him next time. Guys, thank you very much for your question. Thank you very much for joining us here today. Mike, I have a question for you. You mentioned The Office several times. I'm a huge fan of the English version of The Office. Were you a fan of that? Were you familiar with the English version
huge.
when you started working on the American version?
Yes, I was an enormous fan. I was such a big fan. I was working at Saturday Night Live when it was airing, and I had a friend of mine in England like get bootleg copies of DVDs and mail them to me so I could watch it before it aired. And I, like many people, I don't know what you thought, but like many people, I thought that adapting it was a terrible idea. I thought it was a huge mistake. It was going to fail miserably, and there was no point in even trying. The guy who adapted it, Greg Daniels, who sort of became my mentor, I went and met with him to when I was looking for a job, and I remember thinking like, well, if this fails, it won't be because that guy doesn't know what he's doing. Like he just was so smart, and he had thought about it. He was very, very aware of how difficult it was going to be. He was very aware that everyone thought it was a terrible idea. Like he was 5 steps ahead of everybody else when it came to that show. And he had filled notebook after notebook with ideas and thoughts and diagrams and sort of musings about the characters and how they should change. And so it really is a testament to him. And it's him and Steve Carell really are the 2 reasons that show survived. Because when we did the first season, a lot of people don't remember this, like no one liked it. Like we put out the first season, it was only 6 episodes, and everyone hated it, and critics hated it, and audiences hated it, and everybody hated it. And we hung on by the skin of our teeth, and Greg made a lot of really smart decisions, and then it sort of blossomed into this 10-year long kind of giant hit show. So yeah, I knew it and loved it. I still love it. I still think it's a masterpiece of TV, and I'm very happy that our version didn't totally ruin it.
I totally agree with you about the English version of The Office, and I think that maybe people didn't like the first season of the American version because they hold so dear the English version. There's only 12 episodes plus the Christmas special, so it's like there's not a big sample size to go by, and so it's so precious. Really, it was almost considered sacrilegious by the fans of the English show to kind of do an American version. But you know what? Good writing is always going to come out, and like you said, Steve Carell and the creators of the show, they kept doing good work, and eventually it's going to take hold because it is a truly entertaining show.
Yeah, I think that the people who loved the English version were angry that it wasn't as good as the English version, and the people who didn't know the English version were just like, what the hell is this? I don't get it. Why are people talking to the camera? What's happening? Because that was a new thing back then. It's hard to remember that mockumentary style. Since there have been a bunch of shows that have done it, but back then it was brand new. So I think no one knew what to make of it, really. And then it just took a while for people to kind of train themselves. Greg had this theory, which I thought was really smart, which was this will catch on because like the YouTube era had just started, and there were a lot of people who, or maybe it was just about to start, I can't remember, but people were like taking videos of themselves and like posting them online. And so the idea of someone looking right at the camera and talking was like, it was in the ether. And I think the show kind of dovetailed with that, with like YouTube came out in 2006 or something. And it just became this thing where, oh, I know what that is. I get it now. I recognize that, So a lot of things had to break right for that show to be successful. And they kind of all did. That's what's really crazy about it.
Yeah, that's a good point, that timing between the YouTube era and breaking that fourth wall and the success of The Office. Because you're right, it was pretty groundbreaking when the English version did it, which is obviously part of its genius. Because when you see the English version originally, like, is this supposed to be funny? Is this a documentary? So
that's right.
That cringeworthy comedy is just so genius.
And that cringeworthy comedy, and then the incredibly dry British sense of humor, which is not the American sense of humor at all. Like, it really was just a very new experience, I think, for people to see that kind of stuff. And now it feels like, oh, it's always been here. But before then, it didn't exist,
Yeah. So if you haven't seen the English version of The Office, I encourage you to go out and check it out because it is a fantastic show, as is the American version. Mike, let's go to our last live look in right now. We're going to go to USO Senior Direction of Center Engagement and Sarah Reinsfleisch. Hi, Sarah.
Hi. How are you doing tonight?
We're great.
Great. Thank you so much for tonight and letting me ask a question. I'm a big fan. I've been with the USO for 12 years. And I flipped when I saw your photo come across the graphic for this session. So thank you.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you.
And congratulations on Rutherford Falls season 2. I am a huge fan of the show. I love it. I'm so excited you get to unpack that a little bit more, and Sierra gets to do more. So I'm really excited for that.
Great.
And my question is kind of related to that show and kind of what you were talking about earlier about getting to tell Indigenous stories now.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like all your shows really focus on character and people as a center of it. And it's a real big strength of all of your shows, while also being inclusive in many areas. So can you talk a little bit about your philosophy and approach to being inclusive and how people might apply that to their everyday life?
Sure. I mean, the character part of it as the focus is something that Greg Daniels taught me. His theory, and the reason he wanted to adapt The Office, was because in his mind, The Office was the perfect show. And the reason it was the perfect show is that the setting is so boring, right? It couldn't be more boring. It is a generic office in a smallish city in Pennsylvania, and the lighting is dim and drab, and the background is drab, and all the furniture is drab, and the carpet is drab. And his theory was that the more boring the setting, the more the characters come to the fore, the more you get to focus on the interesting inner lives of the people that you're actually watching. And he never wanted to do a big flashy premise show where it's like, oh, the people in outer space or people here or whatever. Although it's fun, ironically now he's doing the show Space Force with Steve, but we'll put that aside. So his thing was always character, right? Make the strength of any show is the strength of its characters and how interesting they are and how they talk and how they interact with each other. The inclusion part of it is something that has evolved and come a long way in the 18 years that I've been writing out here. And I think of it this way, like I am a white dude from suburban Connecticut. I'm 45 years old. I'm married to a very nice white lady, and we have 2 very cute white children. Our story has been told on television 200,000 times. There is nothing left to say about my story and my wife's story and our kids' story, because we're 100 years deep into the history of television at this point. And for the first, call it 70 of those years, the only kind of story that got told was mine, essentially, some version of mine. There have been stories about white families that are wealthy and white families that are poor, and everywhere in between, middle class, working class, high, rich, in the Northeast, the Southeast, the West, the Rocky Mountains, wherever you can imagine there being a story about people like me, there has been. And so I have realized over the last 17 years that, like, if you just want something new or slightly more interesting or slightly fresher, that it has to involve people who don't look exactly like me and aren't exactly like me. And so that has led me to change the way I think about hiring people, hiring writers, hiring actors, and also designing characters. On the show The Good Place, the one of the main characters is named Chidi, and he is from Senegal. And his description on paper is just like, he's a philosophy dork. He's just a very smart guy who loves philosophy. And I realized, like, well, that person can be from anywhere. That person could be from Rio de Janeiro or El Salvador or Calgary or Senegal or Finland or whatever. So I'm going to pick the most interesting place I can think of with the most interesting storyline that it implies, and then take all these character traits and just put them in that version of a person. And what was really interesting was you sort of imagine in your head what that will look like, and then you find an actor like William Harper who played the role, and it's like, wow, this is like magic. Like, I found the perfect person to play this role to match exactly what I wanted. And then it kind of struck me like, yeah, that's probably true of everybody. You can design whatever kind of character you want from anywhere who looks like anything, and somewhere out there's the perfect person to play that part. The other role in that show, like Tahani, who was South Asian, I had written down as my idea for her, like the South Asian Grace Kelly, like tall and glamorous with like a pristine Oxford British accent, and like English educated but South Asian. And then our casting director, Allison Jones, went out and found Jamila Jamil, and was like, well, here she is. She exists on Earth. Like, you can, and it was a great lesson in, like, just design the most interesting versions of these people, and then hire a really good casting agent and work really hard and look at a million people, and you will find a person who fits that description. And also your cast ends up being really interesting. And like, those are 2 good examples of a character that you haven't seen a lot on TV that are more interesting because the character descriptions aren't the same things we've seen for our entire history of television. So that is like, there are a lot of the good things and bad things about the way TV has changed in the last, call it 15 years. But one of the best things is that it's now possible to do that. And not only is it possible, but people are actively asking for it. Audiences are asking for it. TV critics are asking for it. Studios are asking for it. Like, they want their shows to feel more inclusive and to feel more like they represent the world and not just the same exact slice of white suburban life that they did for a very long time. And I think that almost every show is better for it. I think it makes the shows more interesting. It makes the tapestries more rich and fun to watch and fun to look at. And a lot of actors who maybe wouldn't have gotten big roles on shows 20 years ago are now getting big roles on shows, and it's great. I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure if it did.
Yeah, it did. It was really helpful. And those are characters that I truly love too.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, Jamila had never acted before before she did the show.
Really?
She was like a host in England. She was like a red carpet, like with a microphone interviewing people at like award shows. And Will Harper was an actor in New York who'd done a ton of theater, but he'd never been on a TV show before, or had a major role. And they're both great. They're so good. And it's so nice to think like the world has opened a little bit in the world of entertainment, and actors who weren't getting shots are getting shots now. And that's great.
Thanks for that question, sir. Did you have a follow-up to that?
I do want to dig in a little bit on Terry Thomas and Rutherford Falls, because I love him. Also, probably Michael Gray Eyes is a big reason for that. So how did you guys approach his character development, you and the writing team, and just the overall show approach? Because it seems like he gets unpacked a little bit more each show. And, you know, when you watch it from the beginning, you could take away one perspective, and then you get further along and your point of view about him changes throughout the show. So I'm just kind of curious, is like, what was the approach and the intent, and are we getting that?
Yeah, a lot of the credit for this goes directly to Sierra Teller-Ornelas, who co-created the show with me and Ed Helms, because she had a very, very specific vision for this character and used to talk about him in very specific terms. Part of what's going on there is, in the Native community, like in any community, there are certain stereotypes and tropes about certain kinds of people and the way they're portrayed in the media, the way that people think of them. One of the sort of offensive tropes about Native American men is that they're sort of stony-faced or inscrutable or very serious. And so she had this really, really specific idea for creating a character who would appear outwardly to be that way at first. And then you would dive deep into his life. You would see him with his wife and his kids. You would get to know what his hopes and dreams were when he was younger. He was in a band called Rage Fuel that was like a Soundgarden ripoff. And you would start to understand that like he is so much more than you thought he was when you first saw him. And so we wrote it into the script. When you first meet him, the character Regan is giving him a presentation, and she's nervous and she's kind of flop sweating, and he's sitting behind his desk and he is staring stony-faced and impassively at her. And that was a little bit of a wink, I think, to the idea of like, you think you know who this guy is. If you stick with the show and you watch the episodes, you're going to learn that you have it wrong, that he's not this guy, that he likes to laugh and have a good time, and that he has a wife and kids and all of the sort of normal problems that people have in normal lives, regardless of who you are or where you come from. So what you're describing is very astute, and it's very much intentional as a way to kind of undermine a reductive stereotype for what a certain kind of Native American man is and what his sort of emotional life is like. And I think in season 2, you'll see even more of that. Like, we have plans for him to go through some stuff that is this, you know, he's a smart guy. He's a powerful guy within his community and within the town. And we're going to, you know, put him through a little bit more of the ringer that lets you get to know him as a person and see him in 3 dimensions.
Awesome. Well, I'm Team Terry, so I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. You're obviously a true fan of the show, and very excited to see season 2. Thanks for joining us here at the USO MVP program. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Chris.
Mike, got one more comment for you from the chat box. This comes from Brittany Wagemaker. She says, "Thank you for Parks and Rec. It's my favorite show, and I have rewatched it countless times. I also have loved The Good Place in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, so appreciate the shows that you have provided and giving me a happy escape." That comes from Brittany Wagemaker once again. Mike, I also want to let you know that people are checking in from all over the world: North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Maryland, California, Japan, Texas, Germany, Kansas, Minnesota, Montana, Washington, D.C., Florida, Hawaii, Okinawa, Colorado, North Dakota, Nevada, Mississippi, Ohio, Washington, New Mexico, and the UAE. So this is truly a worldwide event. And I want to thank you for joining us here in the last couple minutes. I want to offer you an opportunity to give some words of encouragement and support to the troops who are tuning in.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. This was so fun. It's a real honor to speak with the active service members and their families. My father was in the Navy Reserves for more than 30 years. He retired a captain. He went on active duty a lot when I was a kid. I remember him. He was in the Gulf War, the reflagged Kuwaiti oil tankers in the Gulf War in 85 and 87. He would always bring me back something from everywhere he went. He would send me postcards. My whole life was filled with slideshows of him on destroyers and aircraft carriers and he would walk me through what every plane was and what he would take pictures of all the servicemen and women on the boats and tell me who they were and what they did. So I have some real connection to you and to your service, and I understand the sacrifices you're making. I am truly in awe of those sacrifices. It is very meaningful to me and to my family. We think about you all the time, and we're sending you just the best of luck and courage and hope that you all are enjoying your experiences and that you get to see the world and that you get home safe. So thank you so much for what you do on behalf of me and my family and everybody that I work with out here in California. Thank you.
Appreciate those words of support, Mike. And thank you so much for joining us here. It has been a blast talking to you. Good luck with all of your projects going on, and congratulations on your continued success. And once again, from all of us here at the USO, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.